People who like to explore abandoned buildings. What was the biggest duck I'm out moment you had while exploring? Broke into an abandoned house in the village I grew up in England back when I was a teenager, maybe 15 years ago now. Was with a couple friends, but broke off by myself and ventured upstairs. When I turned at the top of the stairs I saw a figure standing in the darkness just staring at me. I bolted out of the building as quickly as I could, and my friends heard me and panicked. They weren't far behind. Went back there a couple of weeks later with a bigger group to prove my story, and to my embarrassment, it was a tall mirror at the top of the stairs. The figure I saw was me. Not my proudest moment. When you stare at the abyss stares at you. I used to walk around an abandoned building near a forest which was initially a child hospital in the 70s, a refugee housing in the 90s and a language school for Chinese students till 2007. Since then it's abandoned. The students left quite suddenly, so I found diaries, certificates and even food. It was interesting, since the place was not vandalized at that time. Once I was inside the building again, when I realized someone else was walking upstairs. I never left this place so fast. Jumped over the gate and headed to my car. When I reached there, a police car stopped in front of the building and the two officers jumped over the fence to enter the building. No idea what was there, but sometimes I wonder if I avoided more than just a report for trespassing. Plot twist, someone reported you for breaking in. Could be motion sensors that detected something. I thought that might be possible when it was freshly abandoned, but if the owner ever did, he stopped it. The place nowadays is a total mess and vandalized. Young people partying, homeless people sleeping, and a room full with pentagrams and candles on the ground and blood-written texts on the wall. Today all doors and windows are blocked with wooden plates, which does not really prevent people from entering. Makes it just more spooky during the day. Late to the party, but used to work for a guy renovating houses. He'd buy dumps for like 5 to 10,000 that had been abandoned for years. We'd fix them up, and he'd rent the houses out. His daughter would go to houses to take pictures after he bought them, since he'd buy a lot of them sight unseen because they were so cheap. One house she went to take pictures at, and she was kinda creeped out by the basement and did not want to go in. She just opened the door, leaned in, reached her arm out, and took a picture. When her dad reviewed the pictures, he saw a man standing in the basement about 5 feet from the camera staring directly into it. I have gone down this whole thread of stories becoming more and more on edge, but I can't stop reading. This is the story that just gave me the biggest chill. They're so creepy, but addicting to read party, because I'm so curious about exploring all these oldest abandoned buildings in Baltimore. Found a bottle of some liquid in an abandoned drive-in theater building. Knocked it over, and the concrete starting smoking, and we got nosebleeds instantly. Still no clue what it was, but we got the duck out. Several years ago, a man was murdered in the city I was working in, and parts of his body were turning up at various locations. I think his hand and foot had been found, and a week had passed. I'm an architectural designer, and I was surveying an abandoned chapel that was slated to be renovated into condos. It was apparent that homeless people had been squatting in the chapel, but I wasn't sure how recently they had been there. When I went into the basement though, it was clear someone was either there or had just left, based on the smell. There were no lights due to the power being cut, and I didn't stick around long enough to see if anyone was currently occupying the space. 2 days later someone reported that they found the torso and head of the murdered man in the building, attached to the chapel. I had been too freaked out by the smell in the basement to continue on to the attached building, but I'm almost certain I would have been the one to find the body. Was this in New Haven by any chance? Sounds like a similar case to one in that area. Yes, it was. A group of us went into an old abandoned care home. We got in legally. It was pitch black, and I mean the type of darkness where you cannot see your hand in front of your face, even when you let your eyes adjust. Fortunately we had a few light sources with us. After walking around and finding copious amounts of evidence that there was squatters staying there, not at the time of our arrival thank God, we found ourselves standing in a room filled with graffiti, but not graffiti from a paint can. This was spelled in dried blood and excrement. The stench was horrendous. We got out of there so quick, and have never been back since. As kids we would walk this 1/4 mile railway tunnel near where I grew up. There were no tracks, but it was next to 2 live tunnels, so there was a slight element of danger. That and the fact it was trespassing, I guess, and railway workmen or transport police could catch us at any moment. So as you can imagine, it was dark. Real dark in the middle. But towards the end there was enough light to barely see. One day we took an old school pal down there, and after walking the length, almost at the end of the tunnel, just as it was beginning to get light, he stopped to look down a large uncovered square 3 feet by 3 foot manhole. No, he didn't fall in. But after a flash of brief confusion he took in a deep breath and screamed. Then immediately started sprinting for daylight. Oh shit. Fucking ruin. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. He screams. Naturally, without question we ran, having a hard time catching him up. At the mouth of the tunnel we stopped. All out of breath. WTF. Exclamation mark. What's wrong? What did you see? We asked. His face was pure white and shaking, barely able to speak. He said there was someone down there looking up at me. Now this buddy was, and still is, a good friend of mine. But back then he was known for not being the sharpest tool in the drawer. Instantly we had an idea what just happened. But slowly we returned to open manhole. Then as the 4 of us stood around this hole looking down, sure enough, reflected in the still water about 5 feet down this feckin' hole was our 4 faces looking back up at us. My friends and I went into the Gibraltar mansion in Wilmington. It was cool until we came across a room with an older man squatting in it. He was terrified of us, and we felt pretty horrible. So we left after apologizing. Edit. Squatting is a term meaning living somewhere illegally. The confusion this caused is absolutely hilarious though. Exploring an abandoned prison, part of the ceiling collapsed. It didn't hit me, but it was close enough to knock me over. I guess Junkers used it as a place to shoot up, because I fell on an old needle. I got tested to make sure I didn't get anything from it, but it scared me enough to stay away from abandoned buildings to this day. Got busted by a soldier who told me, rather calmly, that the spot was used for training with real bullets, and that I'd better get out of here before he drags my ass to the cop. The guy was really nice, took the time to explain why it was dangerous, and sent me on my way. I didn't insist. Weirdest part is we explored for 1 or 2 hours before getting busted and met no one. We weren't hitting or anything. As 12-year-old kids, we were exploring the woods as kids do. The forest parted to an open field, and in the distance was an abandoned farm. Naturally we crept inside, and in one of the horse stalls were all discarded hypodermic needles and old food. Our parents were quite mad when we told them what we found. Same. But in an old warehouse by the edge of the city, we also found porn comic books, which we took home because we were 12-year-old girls seeing porn for the first time. It led to a long talk by our parents about how porn can be demeaning to women and doesn't reflect how sex should be. In retrospect, I'm glad for the talk, and glad we took the porn instead of the used needles. I was looking around an old abandoned quarry near where they would process the rocks with a friend when we both hear something moving. He just blurts out hello, and a soft voice replies hello? ? We ran. Edit. Jesus, I get it, echoes exist. I promise you this was a very distinct voice. The quarry itself is actually down the road about a mile, beyond some hills not right by where we were. This reminded me of one. My cousin and I were exploring an underground quarry that, from our knowledge, went on for a few miles. In the entrance there was a lot of spray paint, garbage, etc. One night we walked around an hour in through the shaft. There would be the occasional sign others had been that far, but not much. We each had 2 flashlights, since there was literally no light inside the tunnels. We were considering turning around, and then we both saw a small light coming from up ahead. We walked up and found a small keychain LED light laying on the ground. Turned on. There was only one way in up to that point, so whoever was in there was ahead of us. We were freaked, and the fact that we had an hour of walking with our backs to whoever was in there was maddening. Exploring an abandoned manor with some friends. We had been drinking and smoking, and thought it would be cool. The ground floor entrances were covered with bricks, so we had to enter through the first floor, 8 foot height, using an improvised ladder made of old trash and wood pieces. It was quite unstable and hard to climb, and we were 5 or 6 people. Being the only way out, and knowing how slow it was, I was on edge the whole time. We were exploring the floor. Cool glass ceiling. Lots of debris. But suddenly we find a room filled with plastic containers with pink and brown liquids. Some friends decide to explore the ground floor, which was pitch black, and involved going down a broken staircase missing several steps. They heard someone coughing in the dark, and feel several people moving in the darkness as our eyes get used to it. At this point I was hearing someone slowly walking in a room on the first floor, carefully stepping over the broken glass on the floor, to not make noise, which was really creepy. We got the duck away, and on our way out we saw a roughed up man with bloodshot eyes leaving a shack outside the house, and staring at us. I still shiver when I remember his look. Probably just some junkies living there, but for overly high 15-year-olds it was scary as duck. Wow, I can't believe I have a place to tell this story. When I was in middle school we went upstate in the summer. There was an abandoned house in the woods we explored. Top floor was pretty pristine. The beds were made, and drawers/closets shut with stuff neatly arranged inside. There were bats. The lower you went the more disordered. The basement/garage was in complete disarray. Books and random crap thrown around. Beer cans and used condoms. We went to the far end of the house where the wall partially collapsed, and that's when we saw the bear. Foolishly ran with all our might. Thankfully the house between us and bear's lack of interest is why I'm typing this. There was a coffin. A real coffin. We were in an abandoned factory that some rich family had owned. And there was this one room with a bunch of personal stuff. Letters from the 50s. Furniture. Old photographs. Clothes. Even booze. Like someone's home had been put in there. In the middle of it all a coffin. I swear. The room was gloomy. It was a late summer afternoon. No power and we didn't have flashlights. My friend was like, we gotta open this coffin. We can't leave unless we do. We got her and straight up lifted the lid. A sweet smell came from the darkness. When my grandmother died I was the one to find the corpse and I remember that one quite well. So my heart skipped a couple of beats. The coffin was full of candles. They had a sweet smell. Edit. Typos. I had crept an abandoned house in Seattle in the 90s. The guy had recently died, but not before hoarding 3 stories worth of groceries, unopened QVC orders and tons of ephemera. The power and water had been shut off, and he was shitting and pissing in buckets. I opened a couple of these, which would have been revolting on its own, but for some reason, he was putting wigs and toupees in with the waste. There were stacks of wigs that had yet to be put in the buckets. I did get 3 big bags of Liberty dimes before I fled in disgust. My friends and I were exploring an abandoned military housing complex at night. It was in pretty bad shape, but there were lots of interesting things to see. We almost pissed ourselves a couple times because of mannequins behind doors and stuff. There was also a neat art installation with records hanging from the ceiling. Anyway, we climbed up some stairs to the tallest part of the building. We saw some faint light coming from under a door. Somehow the door had been booby trapped, and as soon as my friend opened it there was a crash and a cinder block on a rope that came swinging out the open door and just missed us. I got a split second look inside where I saw a small fire, a mattress on the ground, and then a man moving quickly toward us. He was silhouetted by the light, so I couldn't make out what he looked like or what exactly he was holding. But I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I yelled run, and we bolted out of there as fast as our legs could carry us. Edit. I found a couple photos from that night. Here link. imga.com/e3mw7cj jpg and here link. imga.com/l6w6bxh jpg. Unfortunately I didn't capture anything too scary for you guys. These are from 2013, and I think the place has since been torn down. I walked into a old abandoned cabin in my neighborhood. I saw movement around me, and when I shined my flashlight to the walls there were thousands of cockroaches and spiders on the walls. I noped right out of there. Edit. Holy crap. I did not expect this to blow up. Thanks for commenting and liking. I'm so sorry for people who had similar experiences. There's a big abandoned factory near the center of our city that teens regularly visit. My friend was telling me a story about how she and a group of friends were walking around the ground floor, almost pitch black in places, when they saw a lone chair in the middle of a big room. They started joking about how it looked like the type of place a kidnapper would tie a victim up, when in the distance they heard glass being smashed. They all took one look at each other, turned around and got the hell out of Dodge, scared it was someone trying to escape. Found a dead deer on top of an old grain mill. All of the stairs were removed, so people couldn't climb them. Getting up there is hard enough without carrying a deer carcass on your shoulders. I think about it all the time lol. I've been many places in the Tri-State area and have experienced floors that are decaying. Once almost fell. Thankfully was a very small drop. Needles, animal corpses, etc. One time at a prison in NJ I saw a cell that was decked out with a decorated dollhouse and you could tell someone was staying there. The creepiest experience I ever had was about 6 years ago. I was in an abandoned hospital in a residential part of New York City which had been abandoned less than a decade prior to our visit. Despite this, it was not a well-known location. We went at night and were exploring the second, third, and fourth floors all without issue and in total silence. There was little to no graffiti and everything was left patient records and tissue samples, medicines, medical equipment. As we reached the fourth floor, we passed a random room that said no explosive gases can be used in this room. I read the sound aloud and we immediately heard a huge thud coming from inside that exact room. My blood ran cold and I literally froze because I felt that someone in that room was making themselves known. We ran out of there and heard slamming doors as we went down all the stairs. I have not been back there since and it's now been sold and is being renovated into a housing complex. I still wonder what would have happened if we went into the room. Used to break into this old abandoned children's hospital with some friends when we were teens. One time, I think perhaps the last time, there was a fresh, child-sized handprint in the dust on a wall, and what seemed like blood droplets / spray nearby. This is not scary, but it's interesting story. My friend was walking in the forest and found old house. When he moved some stuff the ceiling broke and old German light machine gun fell down. Was it a place you'd expect to find a German machine gun? Like Germany or Argentina, Slovenia, Central Europe. During WW2 there was a lot of German camps. I do urban exploring quite frequently and nothing ever makes us leave instantly apart from dodgy floors or squatters. However 5 years ago me and a few friends explored a derelict farmhouse without buildings, which had evidently been left for decades with the state it was in. After having a look around the place and finding nothing but empty buildings, we had a look inside what appeared to be an old stable. Inside was literally hundreds of empty tins of cat food. Some nooses tied to a beam and a fairly new pair of scissors with a brownish crust covering the blades. The smell was putrid. We ventured further into the building and noticed on the floor was a cat's tail and a few cat's paws which had been dismembered and left on the floor. We swiftly exited and on our way out a pickup pulled up onto the side of the farm, bearing in mind it was surrounded by woods and fields with no track leading to it, with 3 men stood in the bed. Needless to say we got out of there as quick as we could and haven't seen or heard anything about it. The farm went on the market and sold earlier this year, so it would be interesting to see who previously owned it. There's one house in my neighborhood that creeps the ever-loving shit out of me. I guess it's been abandoned for some time, because there's a dumpster in the driveway and the grass looks like it hasn't been mowed in years, but no one's attempted to buy it or refurbish it. Every time I go near the place I get the heebie-jeebies. But one night, around 2 or 3ish in the morning, I saw the chandelier on and swaying slightly in the living room. There were no other lights on in the house, and I didn't see any people or signs of people around. I've never noped past a house so fast in my life. Used to duck around this massive property that consisted of 3 gigantic factory buildings right next to a big strip mall plaza. It was pretty popular because the cops never cared enough to patrol, so the whole place was completely covered in really amazing graffiti. Once our group of 9 visited just after a tropical storm that knocked out power in most of the state. We thought it'd be sick to go stargaze up on the roof. To get up, you have to crawl through this partially collapsed passageway and then climb 3 stories up an old ladder. A few minutes after we all got up, a waterlogged section of roof started collapsing, and we all had to scramble on top of each other to get down the ladder, with a few people basically falling part of the way down. We managed to crawl out of the passageway part, just as some metal parts of the roof started crashing down. Decided we probably shouldn't stick around and find out how much more water damage the storm had done. Still continued to visit for several years until the property changed hands and a security guard was hired to watch it, but never dared to go on the roof again and definitely never went after rainstorms. Me friends and I used to smoke weed at an abandoned school frequently. All the doors and windows were boarded up except for the mail slot, and for some reason one of my friends decided to look inside. He exclaimed, "Holy shit." So we all took turns looking in. Inside was a group of masked men. We weren't sure what they were up to, but we got out of there. I think they were looking for computers or anything they could steal, which is strange considering the school had been abandoned for at the very least 5 years. A couple years ago I lived in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi most foreigners like me lived in something called compounds. In these compounds there were houses and there were swimming pools and football courts and all that kinda stuff, and inside you can do what you like. There was this one old apartment block that had been abandoned for years and all of the guards said not to go into it. One day, me and my friend snuck in and went inside. It was really creepy. There was a staircase that went straight into a wall and the pictures were all weird, and we were all super creeped out. We then went into an attic, and then we heard two men talking. We got freaked the duck out and ran. The next day we wanted to see it again, and we were less shocked, since we'd already seen it. We went back into that attic, and it turned out it was just two Bengali maintenance workers chilling. If you enjoy watching these videos, make sure to hit the subscribe button and like this video. Thanks.